But we are in a series today that we've been in for a while called The Table. And we are working through the Gospel of Luke. 1/5 of the Gospel of Luke is told in the setting of a meal. The table is one of the central themes of Jesus' ministry. For Jesus, the table represents the main way that he engaged with people. And the table also was the main way Jesus understood God and his kingdom. You might even say that eating represents worship more than singing in the Bible, which for some of you, you just got a little bit more excited to worship. You're like, I can't wait to worship after church, right? But, I mean, it's true. Today, though, we're going to move just a little bit further into Luke's gospel. Last week, we were in Luke chapter 14 as Jesus entered the house of a Pharisee to eat dinner with him. Verse 1 of chapter 14 says that while Jesus is at the meal, that they're watching him carefully. They're looking for an opportunity for him to fail. They have Jesus surrounded. And it's during this meal, Jesus tells a story about how God's kingdom works. And the way he compared it to was a banquet where God invites sinners, the lame, the broken, and the blind to all come and to be at his table with him. Well, what's interesting is when we start chapter 15, Jesus is still at the same party. He's still at the same Pharisee's house. But what's interesting is what the beginning of chapter 15 says. In 15 verse 1 it says, "Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all drawing near to Jesus." Okay, so you got to mentally picture this. Jesus starts at this party surrounded by Pharisees. But after Jesus tells the story of inviting the broken to the table, the Pharisees find themselves surrounded by sinners. So like what started as a trap for Jesus is just fine now because all of his people are now coming around. And I've often wondered, why do these sinners show up now? And I don't know what the reason is. I don't know if it's because they can hear Jesus teaching. I don't know if the rumors of Jesus being there has drawn people in to come check it out. I don't know if Jesus' disciples were listening to the story and the part where it says that the master sends out his servants to go bring more people in. I don't know if they've gone out and said, hey guys, I think Jesus wants you to come to dinner. I don't know why these people show up. But what is the most remarkable thing about these people showing up to this place at this time is that these are people who have been rejected by religious leaders. They've been rejected by church. They've been rejected in their mind by God. And yet, they find themselves comfortable enough to enter into the home of a religious leader. Which to me only speaks of how highly they think of Jesus. That he loves them so well that they would go into any environment just to listen to him. And that's made me ask a question of myself lately. Do I live in a way that people would feel safe to find me anywhere? That even if I'm not in a safe space for them, that people, they would still come to me because I'm where they're safe. In any event, there's now a crowd of sinners coming into and surrounding this Pharisee's home. This Pharisee, who I imagine lives in a nice part of town, finds himself surrounded by people he actively avoids. Like these are people who bring down his property value. You know what I'm saying? And it says in verse 2 that the Pharisees and scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and he eats with them." These people are annoyed because this is their space and there are people who are welcome and there are people who are not. I mean, ask yourself this. Who do you get annoyed if they were to show, who would you be annoyed with if they showed up at your house or at your party? Who immediately do you kind of like when you're scrolling through your Facebook invites, you're like, not that one. But then they show up. Like, don't get me wrong, like, you'll be polite to them in public. Like, if you're at work or if you run into them at the store, you'll be civil. But how many of them would you have in your home? Because the truth is, when we're at home, or when we have a gathering, we want just our people at the table. But their problem isn't just the people who are coming to the table. That's not the complaint Luke says they have. Their complaint is that Jesus accepts the people who are coming around the table. Jesus has the nerve to say and to practice that God is at this table welcoming these people. That Jesus is saying that this is actually the right thing to do. Like you think about sometimes in religious circles, we talk about what's holy and what's good and what's true. And Jesus is saying the holiest thing you can do is to spend time with these less than holy people. And that made me think of another question. I wonder how long I would tolerate Jesus eating at my house if I knew the people that he was going to bring with him. I wonder if, back when I was getting married, if I would have given Jesus a +1. I don't know what he's bringing. And he probably wouldn't stop at 1, It's a good thing he can make more wine and food, because otherwise we'd have a problem. But think about this. I think there's a level where we want to believe that we're welcoming and accepting people, but we want there to be caveats. And maybe the biggest one we have is maybe I'd let someone come into my party or let someone come into my home. But if they're one of those people that have been wrong and do wrong things, I at least want them to come in with the acknowledgement of what they do wrong. Do they recognize that they're the villains in the story? Do they know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are? And obviously I'm one of the good guys because I'm going to be nice enough to let these people into my home. And I don't know where that comes from, but we have this deep internal need for wrong people to recognize their wrongness to us. Like maybe it just makes me feel superior, or maybe it makes me feel like I get some sort of justice if I imagine that they've slighted me in some way. That's, okay, so they recognize it? Good. Okay, as long as we know that you're the wrong one and I'm the right one, then we can continue. But Jesus treats these sinners not just as if they just have some sort of friendship, but even more so that they on some level have some kind of equality with God. Not to say that they're like God or worthy like God, but that God actually comes and is on their level and with them and treats them as an equal. And so you can feel the tension building in the room. So Jesus begins to tell these stories as he hears these people grumbling. Do you know how far you have to push people before they start muttering out loud for everyone to hear? The Pharisees are no. This is too far. Are you seeing what's happening? They're not hiding things. Have you had someone grumble in a situation, maybe you got that one relative who they do not keep their opinions to themselves, and you're like, easy. Come on. No, don't do this right now. And so Jesus, instead of just letting that continue, what he does is he goes into telling 3 different stories. And all of them are about the heart of God. Now, the first two are very similar. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them. In Luke 15, 3 through 7, Jesus mentions that there's a shepherd who had 100 sheep, and he loses one. And so he goes out, he leaves the 99, and he finds the one. And the way Jesus ends the story is he ends with something old. He says there is more of a celebration in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 who have no need to repent. Now, the second story is in Luke 15, 8 through 10, about a woman who lost a coin. Now, I understand that coins don't mean a whole lot since gas is like $4.60 right now. But where's $5.50? If you have to buy premium. Oh, don't buy premium. No, just don't do that. We're not buying anything that's a lot. Water down your gas at this point, right? But that's good. Car guys, that's healthy? No. But change doesn't make a huge difference in our life. But coins back then were, because the coin that is in the story is called a drachma. It represents a day's wage. And so imagine that one day you worked 7 days that week, and one day you didn't get paid for. You would go in and have a conversation with your boss, right? My paycheck is short. But Jesus is saying that when you know you've lost something important, there's nothing you won't do to find it. You do it for an animal, you do it for money. Shoot, I do it to save money. Like one of my kids had these fundraiser cards that they were supposed to raise money for their school with. We lost them. We lost these fundraiser cards, and they were worth like $200. Do you know how many times we tore apart our house? 3. 3 was the number that we tore apart our house. And do you know where we found them? At one of the kids' lockers at school. They weren't even in our house. I'm not sure they were ever in our house. But here's what Jesus wants you to know. Jesus says, look for a sinner like you would look for a Subway card. He doesn't quit until he finds them. Even if the sheep is an idiot and gets lost every 5 days, God is thrilled to find what has been lost. And Jesus says there's a bigger party over finding what's lost than finding those who were never lost. And I want us to sit in that for a second, because I think it's important to recognize the conflict these stories can stir in us. Because if you really think about it, it can sound like Jesus is saying that if you're good, heaven isn't as happy with you as if you were really bad. And that's missing the point. Jesus isn't saying that this is some spiritual plea for attention from God, that God really pays attention if you act up a little bit, like with your kids. Well, why are they acting out? Well, they just want some more attention. That's not what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying is that God cares so much for sinners coming home is because of the value that he places on them. If you were a shepherd, you know the value of a sheep. If you have money, you know the value of money. If you don't have money, you know the value of money. But our problem is we look at sinners and we think that because of what they've done, they do not have value. We value animals, we value money, but we do not value people. I still remember when I was first dating Tamara, I was here, there was this story on the news about some puppy that was found beat by a dumpster, and they raised like $15,000 to try to save this puppy. And 2 days later, I remember that they found a homeless dead veteran somewhere. And it didn't make the news for the week. We value animals. We value money. I'm not sure we value people. And that's why it's so important that Jesus enters into this story, and even the way that he enters into this next story. One of the best known stories that Jesus tells is known as the story of the prodigal son. And the way it begins in verse 11 is Jesus says, there was a man who had 2 sons. And right from the beginning, what Jesus does is he describes these sinners not as the sum of what they have done, not as the sum of their failures, but their identity is first and foremost children of God. That before we know anything of either son's performance, their value is they belong to their Father. But Jesus enters into the story, verse 12 through 16. It says that the younger of the sons said to his father, "Father, give me a share of the property that is coming to me. Give me my inheritance." And he divided his property between the sons. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into the far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his field to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. Okay, so the story starts out with this younger son asking for his inheritance. Like, when do you normally, just pop quiz, when do you normally get an inheritance? When someone dies, right? When your parents are dead. So this son is basically ending his relationship with his father. He is worth more to his son dead than alive, even though the obvious implications are later in the story that this is not to live. The father seems like he's doing pretty okay. It doesn't sound like the father's that bad of a guy either, because honestly, if one of my kids came up and said, "Hey, can you just die so I could have some stuff?" I'd be like, "You can," like, that's not how this goes. If my kid talks to me like, sorry, he's done. Like, now you're out of the will. I'm going to give it to your other two, right? Your other two siblings. But this son would still rather live on his own. The younger son takes the money. The father gives it to him. And the younger son takes the property, and he goes as far away from his father as he can. And we can make up stories to make us feel better about ourselves at this point. We could say, well, he just wanted to go off and be his own man. Or the son just wanted to make his own way in the world. But the bottom line is, he just wanted to live how he wanted to live. There's a song I actually thought about when I was reading this part. There's a song by Bruno Mars. Is it called Too Hot, or is it Uptown Funk? But the line goes, "Stylin', wildin', live it up in the city. Got Chuck's on with St. Laurent. Got to kiss himself so pretty." But he's so hot, his money's burning a hole in his pocket. And for some of us at this point, the story is a little too familiar. You know what it's like to have wanted all the good things out of life just without God. You love the life He gave you. You love the world He made you. You love everything you can get out of life. You want it, though, without the one who gave it to you. And so the further we move from God, there's sometimes this sense that we have more freedom. We even maybe feel more of a license to live the way that we want. But if you've been down that road, you know that it leads to bigger wants and emptiness. That there is nothing more hollow than getting the life you thought you wanted. It's like you have a hole in your stomach and it doesn't satisfy. And at some point, you wonder where you went wrong. Like, why? I had everything I wanted. I could do anything I wanted. Why did my life end here? And it's at this point this younger son at some point figures out the hard way that all of the blessings he's had out of life came because of his relationship with his father. And the further away from his father he ends up, the more he realizes that he doesn't even have what the pigs have. It's actually from living the life he thought he wanted that he realized that the life he wanted never offered him what he wanted. And that's the thing we have to understand about sin. Like, sometimes we've got this terrible idea about sin, that sin is just about breaking some rules, and that God is some prude and he doesn't want you to enjoy life. The problem with sin is that sin does not keep its promises. And it's in its lowest moment. It's from his depression. It's from his dissatisfaction. It's from this man getting everything he thought he wanted that he actually comes to understand that he needs to go back to the Father. Now, we would put it another way. We would actually put this, that the guy finally hits rock bottom. And some of us know how steep that fall is. Some of us know that the person who is the most responsible for our failures in our life is ourselves. We made the decisions. We hurt people. We ran over people just to find what we think is our personal happiness. We talk like God doesn't care what we do as long as we're happy. And I want you to listen to me, because sometimes I hear preachers talk about this like, like, oh, it's not about happiness or anything like that. As if like God wants you, as long as you're miserable but right, then it's fine. I think God does care about our happiness. The problem is we have no clue what actually makes us happy. We have no clue what actually makes us happy, and we don't trust that God knows what makes us happy. And so we try to create and to invent and provide our own happiness, and in the end, we destroy our lives and the lives around us because our goal is our happiness. And we don't understand how doing it God's way brings life. And so we create our own life. We don't think being generous will get us there, so we spend all we have on ourselves. We want intimacy, so we think sex is the answer. We don't want to deal with our personal pain, so we drink to enjoy ourselves. And we're not any happier. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know that you have been trying to fill a hole in your life again and again and again. And no matter how many times you try the same things to fill that void and that happiness, you are no happier. But God forbid you try it God's way. And that's the son. His misery is not his dad's fault. His dad gave him everything. His life and his problems are his fault. And it's finally leading him to the place where he's ready to change his life. And it's the good things his father did for him that actually makes him think of going back home. He even thinks back and he thinks, man, even my dad's employees have it better than most people. And so what he does is what we all do. Like when you ever feel like you got to go eat crow, you know what I mean? Like when you got to go and just, suck it up and face it and apologize to someone. He prepares a big speech. And he's like, okay, I'm going to say, okay, so I was wrong. Okay, obviously. That's probably a good start. He says, okay, I'm not going to come back as a son. I'm going to go back. You know what? I'm not even going to be a servant. I'm going to be a slave. I'm going to be the lowest of the low. Just let me come and have a job. And he goes home to offer himself as a slave. He gets how undeserving he is to go home, except when he comes home, it doesn't go the way he thought it would. Like, how many times have you gone in a rough situation and you just knew, okay, I'm going to see this person, and this could go bad. Like, there's sometimes it's like we want to apologize, but we actually think that's going to go worse if we go do that, and so we just hide. He goes home, and he's expecting the worst. He deserves the worst. But look what happens. He goes home to beg, and Luke 15:20-24 says, "He rose and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and what? Felt compassion. And he ran and embraced him and kissed him, and the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants," look at that. Does he even pay attention to the speech? No. Like all that preparation, making sure that his grammar was good and all that, doesn't matter. Father doesn't even listen. He's like, yeah, that's nice. Anyways, servants, bring quickly the what? The best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and the shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. And so who the father sees, he doesn't see the person who stole from him. He sees the person who wanted him dead. He doesn't see the person who blew his fortune. He doesn't see the person who blew his life's work. He sees his son. Because that's who this person is. Not the sum of his failures, but his flesh and blood. And he puts new clothes on him, which was a big deal back then. And he puts on him a ring, which was like giving him a new checkbook. That's a signet ring. Anything he stamps, that's paid for. That happens. And then he gives him a pair of new shoes. And then what does the father do? He invites his son and everyone around him to the table. He puts on a better party than his young son could ever dream of. Like his young son thought he knew what it was like to party. He went off and he did his thing. He hit Vegas. He hit all the tables, and he didn't know at home, dad parties better than they do out there. And that's the thing about the table, because the table isn't just a place of relationship. It's a place of celebration. It's a place where life is renewed, restored, and redeemed. Jesus is saying that God is celebrating these sinners who are coming to Jesus at this table, that's the Father's heart. That for all of their failures, for everything that's wrong with them, for all of the things that you could rightfully blame on these people, God couldn't be happier that they're there. But remember how the story started. Verse 11. There was a man who had See, this story isn't really about the younger son. It is, but it's not. The story is about the older son, his brother. Except he's not excited at all about what's going on. He hears the party that's happening, and instead of joining it, he keeps working out in the field. Like, do you know what kind of grudge you have to be that you would rather be tilling soil in a field in the hot sun than eating steak? Like, you have to be really angry. You have to have an axe to grind. That you would rather go and sweat it out in the sun than to go eat a steak. Because in this son's mind, there is nothing to celebrate. His brother not only hurt his dad, but think about what this son has put the whole family through because of this stunt. But what's worse for him isn't what the brother has done. The worst thing for this older son is that his father is celebrating this traitor. Look what it says in 29 and 30. The older son says, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed a fattened calf for him." And here's the thing, you know something? He's got a point. He did everything right. Where's the party? He blew all of the money. The younger brother blows all the money on prostitutes, and he gets a party. Like, there's nothing fair about how they're being treated. And the only thing worse than his brother and what his brother has done is the betrayal he sees from his father, that he has been working this whole time to make up for his brother's losses. He has been angry at his brother on behalf of his father, and now his dad rolls over the second this traitor comes home. He's jealous. He feels all the inequality. This son can only see the differences between him and his brother. Differences in their behavior, differences in their rewards. But here's the thing. For all of the differences these brothers might feel, the truth is, they're more like twins. I want you to just pick up on all the ways that these brothers are the same. For one, both felt they're entitled to the blessings of the Father. One just wanted him dead, and the other one just wanted something later. Both know better than their father. Both have now spent time outside of the Father's house. But both are still wanted home by their father. And you can really see that as we get into the last part of this parable. Look at how the father now speaks to the older son. He says in verse 31 and 32, he says to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It is fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." I want you to catch how the father talks to his son. There's a huge paradigm gap between these two people. The son says, "I have served you for so many years." He thinks, "I've been a servant." But look at how the father addresses him. He doesn't say, "Okay, servant." He says, no. His first word to him, the first thing out of the father's mouth is, "Son." The son sees himself as a servant. The father sees him as a son. The son wonders why the dad didn't give him an animal to kill for the party. He says, "Why didn't you ever give me any of this?" But then the father says, "Isn't everything I own also yours?" The son sees everything as being kept from him, all belonging to the father being kept from him. But the way the father sees their relationship is that there's no gap between them at all, that anything the father has belongs to his children. The older brother doesn't recognize his younger brother as his brother. Instead, he says, "That son of yours." Now, parents, let's be fair. You may have said that to your spouse about your kids when they do some things, okay? Right? He sees him as an enemy. But the father immediately responds and says, "No, your brother." Where the son sees an enemy, the father sees family. And then the older brother points out fault. He says, "He's devoured everything, all of your property." But what the father does is he points out value. Where the older son says, "He wasted your property," the father says, "There is no property that is worth more than the life of my son." So where the brother sees property, the father sees a person. About 3 years ago, I read a book called The Return of the Prodigal Son by a priest named Nguyen. And you may not have ever heard of Nguyen. He's one of my favorite authors, but he was a close friend of someone you do know, a Mr. Fred Rogers. Mr. Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. He's not gone that long, right? Okay. But what Henri does in this book isn't just talk about the story of the prodigal son, but he does it in light of a painting that Rembrandt did of the same story. And this is the painting here. You could see it here. This is a picture of Rembrandt's painting of the prodigal son. And you could see the three characters in the story. There's the father embracing his lost son. You can see people in the background are being drawn in by the affection of how the father has welcomed his traitorous son home. You can see how the lost son is dressed, by how the lost son is dressed, how broken his life away from home has become. If you zoom in on the son, you can see that. You can see I mean, one of his shoes is not even on his feet. The other one is broken. You could see the rags that he's wearing. You could see that his head is shaved, and that he's just unkept, unwell. There's nothing good about him. But then there's the older son who you can see off to the side. And you could see a couple of things about him. You could see the way that he is standing. His hands are closed, as if not to embrace the brother. You can see how he is looking down on his brother in judgment. But something else you should notice is that this brother is dressed exactly the same way the father is. As if to say he believes he has been good, that he has been exactly like his father because they're dressed the same. But the obvious reality is he is not like his father because he is not embracing his brother the way his father is embracing his brother. And so the older brother is not just looking down on his lost brother, but also on his father for accepting him. He has spent all of his time trying to do everything right to be like his father, and he ends up resenting that his father is nothing like him. And so what we have depicted both in the story Jesus tells and Rembrandt's painting is the juxtaposition of resentment and gratitude. And I want to share what Henri Nguyen writes about this as he talks about this painting, as he talks about the story. He says, resentment and gratitude cannot coexist, since resentment blocks the perception and experience that life is a gift. Resentment tells me I don't receive what I deserve, and it always manifests itself as envy. Think about the way that envy shows up in your life. Why does this person make more money than me? Haven't I worked harder? Why do they have an easier time in life? Why have they been promoted when I haven't? Why do people listen to them more than they listen to me? How come I don't get recognition? Like why is my family a mess? Why is my health a mess? Aren't I doing the right things? And let's be honest, some of us aren't that happy as Christians. And there's a place where this resentment takes a different place in our life. Because I think there's a lot of times as Christians that we have this perception that if we follow Jesus, that we are missing out on something else in life. And for some of you, maybe you've been like this older brother. You know, when you think about your life, you can't think of the big and terrible, awful, no good things that you've done. But you see these people, and they've got to live that life, and they've kind of had the best of both worlds. They got to go party, they got to go live it up, they got to have the stories to tell. And sometimes we feel like we've missed out on life because we didn't live that way first. Sometimes we do it like with a testimony, like, I don't really have a good story of how Jesus saved me. Which, let me tell you this, if you ever spend time with people in recovery, none of them want you to go through what they've gone through. No, none of them. Do you know what they're happy about? They're happy that there's people who haven't. They're trying to live that life. Like we keep thinking the grass is greener on the other side. It's not. We've all been miserable, we've all been hurt, and we've all done stuff. And we all think that it would be better if it went a different way. But there's so many times that when you try to do things right, and if you think that doing things right makes you more like the Father, there's times where our rightness, as much as the action we do could be right, our rightness actually makes us resentful. It is so easy to develop resentment when you try to do the right thing, especially when someone's doing the wrong thing. And so here's what I want to do this morning. I just want, as we're thinking about the table it represents, because here's the same table in the same story, and for one of these sons, The table represents hope and being restored and being redeemed. But for the other son, the table represents the thing they resent about God the most. And so, if we were to come back to the table, and I don't know if it goes this way in your home, but if we were to go and say grace at the table, what would saying grace at the table look like? How do we bring grace back to the table? And there's a couple of things that stand out in the story, and the first is just this. You need to celebrate that when lost things are found. There doesn't need to be another reaction. Nothing else needs to come up. A lot of us spend a lot of time trying to balance the wrongs. Just be glad when people come home. You don't need to say anything else. The very act of coming home shows they know that something went wrong. You don't have to do anything else. Just thank God that He's brought them back in your life. 2, you need to recognize that life is a gift. You need to recognize life as a gift. Here's the thing about both sons. None of the possessions belong to either one of them. They both expect things. None of it's theirs. Sometimes when the kids are fighting, I remind them, I own everything in the house. Literally everything. Even the stuff they think they bought, because they still probably bought it with my money. It's all mine, and if not, then it will be. But these two sons have maturity and love for entitlement. If all God ever does for you is give you life and dies for you, is it enough? If the resurrection of Jesus Christ is not enough for you, you do not understand your relationship to the Father. 3, you need to trust God knows how to raise His kids. And maybe you've had this if you got more than one kid. How many times do your kids try to parent each other? You know? Well, adults, we're just larger children. We're constantly trying to parent each other. You need to trust that God knows what He's doing. And God doesn't raise all of His kids the same way. And thank God. Right? You can't raise all your kids exactly the same way. If you treat them all the same way, it's not going to work. They're different. Doesn't mean you love them different. It just means that you got to treat them different so they get what they need. You got to trust that God knows what He's doing, and you need to just worry about yourself following God. The only reason you should be getting involved in a brother's life is not to punish, but to help. Don't leave yourself out of the party. There is only one person who keeps you from enjoying Christ, and that's you. There's only one person who keeps you from coming home, and that's you. There's only one person who keeps you from your church family, and that's you. Because as Jesus is telling the story, you got to remember, the Father calls both sons home. And the tragedy of this story is we don't know the end of it. We don't know how many Pharisees are at this table right now realizing that God is calling them home. But the invitation remains the same. Please come in to the party. Please don't keep yourself away from this. Please do not keep yourself from me. If you keep yourself from me, then the person who is far from home is not the son who left. It's the son who stayed. And my biggest fear as your pastor is that you would come here and you would hear the words of Jesus and you would sing these songs and you would come and get this close to the redemption that is in Jesus Christ. and that you would miss it because your resentment matters more than anything God could give you. That there is nothing God could give you that would ever make you happy. That's why it's so important of what we do right now as we go into a time of communion. This table is a constant reminder of our invitation to the table and the invitation everyone else has at the table. This table is where Jesus comes and calls us to enjoy everything the Father has. That God is calling you to, not just to life, but life abundant. He's not just saying, hey, you can have eternal life one day when you die, if it all works out in the end. No, he's saying that you could experience all the happiness and joy that's in Christ Jesus in your life as you live the life Christ is calling you to. But part of that call in that life is recognizing that everyone else is called too. One of the only times in the Bible that people are told not to take communion is in 1 Corinthians 11. And it talks about not eating in a worthy way. And what it's talking about is not saying, hey, have you been good enough to eat communion this week? Like if you were to grade yourself this week, would you give yourself like a B, B minus, like, okay, I was mostly a Christian this week. That's not what this is about at all. What's actually talking about is how the church was viewing each other. And in that church, they were backbiting and attacking and undermining each other. They were destroying their relationships with each other. And Paul says, whatever you do, you can't come to this table and say that you're taking in the Father's blessing of Jesus Christ while you hate the people who are eating at the table with you. You can't hold on to any bitterness and resentment and pretend that you have any gratitude about what God's done in your life. Both of those things can't exist at the same time. And Paul says, hey, if you're going to come to this table and you're going to be, like you see that person, they're going over this table or that table, so you're going to purposely come over to this table, it's better you stay in your chair. It's better you stay in your chair. Because as long as you won't eat with someone, then you will not eat with the Father. And what you resent is not necessarily what they've done, but you might resent what God has done for them. You think you've deserved this. And Jesus is trying to meet you in your seat right now and say, please don't let that stop you. Please don't let that stop you. And so Tim's going to play, and while he plays, challenge you and invite you to come to this table. And I don't want you to just be thrilled about what Jesus has done for you, as great as that is. I want you to be able to identify the people around you as people who have come home too, and be thrilled that they're at the table with you. Now, I recognize that there are some of you here who have kept yourself from this table, not because of any coming to it, but because you do not see yourself as worthy of the table. The life you've lived, the blessings you've squandered, the things you've done wrong, I'm sure that if someone was to even come close to asking you about your life, just the very mention of the things that have happened to you or that you've done would make you want to run far away from any setting where you could be one with the body of Christ. That there's no world in which you could imagine that God would ever accept you as a son. But that's the whole point of this table, is that God accepts you as a son. And the reason he accepts you as a son is because he gave his son to die in your place so that you could inherit the blessings of God. Ephesians actually talks about that it's actually in the death of Jesus that we become co-inheritors of everything that belongs in heaven. That there is no, here's what's God's, and maybe I can get some of that, but no, it's ours. And it's not just ours in the future, it's ours now. And this table should show you, that should show me that there's nothing that we should say no to when it comes to God, that God wants us home. And so if you're here today and you have stayed far away from God, come home. Just come home. If you're ready to come home, you need to come talk to me. Because what we get to do is we get to celebrate something called baptism. And in baptism, you get to say goodbye to one life and raise to a new life. And you get to put on new clothes. You actually get to clothe yourself with Christ, and you get to be a new creation. And then if you've ever been here for a baptism, you know what we do. Every time we have a baptism here, it gets loud in this room. And that is by requirement, because if the angels in heaven are going to throw a party, then we are too. I've never understood churches that when there's a baptism, people go, yes, this was a good moment. I feel good. Do you feel good? We feel good. Now let's be silent. I want to know what angels in heaven sounds like. I bet you it gets loud. I'm telling you, God celebrates your coming home. Give us a reason to celebrate. But I'm going to pray, and whatever's on your heart, whether it's something where you've been keeping yourself far from God because of someone else in your life, or whether you've been staying far from God because of your own failures, it's time for all of us to come home. And so while Tim plays, we're going to invite you to come up to the tables, come eat, come drink, and to welcome what Jesus has done for you. This is also time for you to give your tithes and offerings that supports the work of what we're doing here. And if you're new here, we'd love to know more about you. On the bottom of those connection cards, there's a place for you to write down your information. We'd love to connect with you. We'd also like to pray with you. On the back side, there's a place for prayer requests. We'd love to be able to be praying for you and with you. And maybe you don't feel comfortable to come and talk right now. Maybe you just want to, but you want to talk to someone at some point. You can write on that same card that you want to come and talk to someone. And we'd love to talk to you about what it means to become a son of the Father. But I'm going to pray. Tim's going to play. Come to the tables. Come eat. Come drink. And then we're going to sing to the Father. And then you can go out and eat and worship too after that. So.